Good afternoon and welcome back to the conference board and a special webcast today focusing on thriving in the future of work. I'm Jim O'Hearn. I'm the Executive Director of our Human Capital Councils here at the conference board. We've got some key questions to answer today. Let's take a look at them. We want to focus on really setting some context for these new workplace realities. There are many in this digital world. We also want to debunk some of the future of work myths that are out there. What should we really believe in based on all of what we're hearing? And we welcome your questions and answers. The chat box will be open and we hope you're active participants. We look forward to engaging with you throughout. For those of you that are earning credits today, notice that you need to stay on with us. You must be present to win, but stay on for the entire webcast. And if you just insert your full name and email address in either HRCI or SHRM or CPE, the type of credit that you're seeking, please note that. And I want to welcome some of our special guests today from Willis Towers Watson. Leslie Jennings, welcome. Tell us about your role, Leslie.
Hi, hello, greetings from Chicago. This is Leslie Jennings, and a little bit about me. I've been in the talent management and rewards space for about 20 years, and most recently specializing more in the talent management front and really thinking about and helping organizations evolve as they start to address what we're referring to as the future of work. Really excited to be here today. Thank you, Jim.
Welcome, Leslie. And Renee, Renee Smith out in San Francisco. Tell us about your background, Renee.
Yes, hi everyone, and thank you for having me. I sit in our San Francisco office, as Jim mentioned. I'm a senior director in our talent line of business. I kind of grew up in the compensation space and now consult at the intersection of talent and rewards. And I also serve as Willis Towers Watson's leader for our future of work offering in North America.
Wonderful, wonderful. I must say, I think we're really looking forward to this conversation today. We know you guys have spent a lot of time on this topic. And it seems that our purpose today is really to explore how this world of work and talent is changing in unprecedented ways and incredible speeds, really ushered in by the increasing use of automation, of robotics, and artificial intelligence. Wow, what a topic. With that, Renee, would you like to take us back to some of your learning on this, to this point? A backdrop.
Yeah, that would be great. And in fact, I thought maybe, Jim, we could start with
Oh, cool. All right. Yeah, let's do that. Let's see here. Our first poll for the audience. And I think we're going to start with the tough stuff, too. We're going right to the deep end of the pool here. Let's pull up that first poll. Waiting for that. Let's see if we've got it here. Oh, okay. So what was one of the first things you did this morning? Spoke to Siri or Alexa, checked your weather app, checked your phone or wearable to see how well you slept, used an app like Waze to navigate your way through traffic, maybe perhaps meditated, or none of the above. Let's see how everybody did.
Some interesting results coming in.
Could one of you guys walk us through those?
Sure. So maybe I think the headline from this is maybe around half of us actually use some sort of mobile device and potentially some artificial intelligence, right? So if you spoke to Siri or Alexa in the morning, you were certainly interacting with a bot of sorts. If you checked your weather app or you used Waze or Google Maps or some sort of navigation to get through traffic, you were also interacting with artificial intelligence. So with that, let's go to our first slide, because really what Jim asked is that we set the backdrop to some of these questions around the future of work. And so this first series of slides just talks about some of the themes that we're seeing in the future of work. And the first is that today we really are a truly connected world, right? We have relatively inexpensive mobile devices that mean we're always on and always connected. So if you think about real-time communication and real-time news cycles, there's little time for really contemplating information and for getting insightful reaction, for example, to a crisis situation. And this interconnectivity allows education and learning technology to scale and easily include many people, regardless of location. It also allows for intense personalization of content. So if you think about things like Amazon, right? Amazon knows me. LinkedIn knows me. It serves up very personal recommendations based on my profile, whether it's in terms of consumer products or in terms of information that might be of interest. And another point here is that the rate of adoption of technology right now is significant as well. So if we think back to when the telephone came into use, it took 75 years for the telephone to reach and be adopted by 50 million users. And then it took Angry Birds Space only 35 days to reach 50 million users. And guess what only took 10 days? Pokemon Go. So the rate of adoption for technology is significant as well. The next sort of backdrop to this is around human and machine collaboration. So we're seeing huge strides in this space as well. So in this picture you see here a woman looking at her smartphone while she's in a self-driving car. Right? So tasks that were previously performed by humans are starting to be replaced by automation or requiring a human automation interface. And businesses are going to require workers to adapt to this changing reality in order to optimize work. Now, some futurists and economists theorize that companies will start to eliminate or marginalize more of the routine and simple work. And there's sort of some myths around that as well as some realities. And we'll talk about that in the myths that we want to debunk as part of this webcast today. But what's important to note is that there are certain parts of jobs or certain tasks that are being and will be automated. So for example, robots today can be better stock traders than humans, right? And it won't be long before we contact artificial intelligence with our smartphone when we're sick and tell it our symptoms and use our camera, right, so that it can kind of get an image and diagnosis. So sensors in everything we use are starting to gather valuable data. I think about my own home where I've got things like a smart thermostat, or I've got, my everything is connected through Alexa. So these technology improvements are going to have impact not just on our personal lives, but on the future of the workplace as well. Next, we're seeing major shifts. Oops, I think I'm in the wrong. Oops, sorry. Major shifts in the adoption of the virtual world in terms of social and organizational reconfiguration. So the democratization of work is changing the nature of the employee and employer relationship. So as work and work relationships become more flexible, right, in part because of technology and the ability to get work done almost anywhere at any time through Skype and through Blue Jeans and through some of those collaboration platforms, the traditional hierarchies and the traditional employment relationship is starting to evolve and be replaced with collaboration and the idea of collective leadership. And finally, we're also seeing major shifts in the global talent marketplace. So in who our employees are, where they work, and what they expect. So there's a global shortage of highly skilled employees. And this is shifting how we are approaching those employees. The potential workforce is growing with increasing diversity and longevity of workers. And as the nature of work starts to change or is changing, the potential talent markets that we're tapping into will expand with more flexible relationships and ways of working to suit different talent needs. So I think that's it, Jerm, in terms of sort of that backdrop.
Incredible excellent backdrop, Renee. So Leslie, how would Willis Towers Watson define? How would you go further in defining the future of work?
Great question. And I always feel the need, before I answer that, I always feel the need to comment that the future of work is somewhat of a misnomer, because the future of work is here, it's now, it's likely why all of you are on this call today. So at Willis Towers Watson, we define the future of work as solving for how, where, and by whom work gets done, including by robotics and artificial intelligence. And it connects the requirements for more automated ways of working with emerging skills, roles, and drivers of engagement for all of your talent. If you think about employees, free agents, contingent workers, etc. So thinking about that entire talent ecosystem.
Well, that's a great definition. Great definition. And I know that you've done some research on the future of work. Leslie, can you say more about some of your findings?
Certainly. And Renee and I will both share recent findings from related to new workplace realities from Willis Towers Watson's Global Future of Work survey, which was representative of 38 countries and over 900 participating organizations. And these survey results are quite informative in debunking, to use the term we used earlier, a number of workplace automation myths and stereotypes that really are giving way to new realities of what it takes to engage and lead talent in what I referred to earlier as this this work ecosystem, where the pace of change is like something we've never seen before, to Renee's comments earlier, and the work relationships are shorter and not as traditional as we've seen in the past.
So we're looking forward to debunking some of these myths. But before we do, I think we've got another poll for the audience. Let's take a look at a second poll here. So what do you think is the primary reason for automating work? Is it cutting costs, minimizing errors, augmenting human performance and productivity, or something else? And results are coming in. And Leslie and Renee, I think we've got a sharp group.
We sure do.
Let's give it another 2 seconds and we'll close it. 84% of the group saying this is really about augmenting human performance and productivity and not so much about that. How does that relate to our myth?
Yeah, excellent. So you all have the storyline really set up well here. So great to see what's interesting about this, and so great to hear what you're sharing here. But what we find is that much of the narrative on artificial intelligence in the press really revolves around this notion of fear, which is not necessarily picked up in your results there, so that's great. But we often find it's something like out of this, you think about something out of a Terminator movie where these intelligent machines and robots are portrayed as an existential threat to our humanity, and if they don't gang up on us, they're going to do the next worst thing, which is perhaps take away our jobs and leave us unemployed. So why is this notion of fear? And it really is, because businesses, so the myth goes, will use new ways of work automation, primarily to reduce costs and minimize errors, which you all didn't necessarily agree with, so that's good, which we know translates into job elimination and replacement of human workers by intelligent machines. Our research will debunk this theory, but let me just tell a quick story. I find it so interesting. And we know that this concept of fear of automation is not new. So we're reading the press. We've got a lot of fear out there. So about a month ago, just for kicks, I thought, I'm going to Google automation taking over jobs and see what pops up. And I came across some amazing headlines. One in particular was, robots have been about to take all the jobs for more than 200 years. Is it really different this time? And then within that article, it included a compilation of several other headlines over the decades about machines and automation taking over. So for example, in 1921, the New York Times featured a book review titled, Will Machines Devour Man? And it was accompanied by an illustration of a person being fed into a sausage grinder. The 1950s kicked off with concern in the UK over a robot revolution, with headlines of, Automation in Britain stirs unrest in labor. Workers see robots depriving them of jobs. Then we move into the 1980s and the computer fear cycle was in full swing. The New York Times started that decade with a warning of a robot is after your job. And of course, here we are now, and there's a lot in between. But this concept of fear is not new. And nevertheless, the data from our global research on the future of work tells a somewhat different and more optimistic story. That more than half, and actually around 57%, of business leaders see artificial intelligence and robots as an opportunity to augment, as you all indicated, human performance and productivity. And we know this augmentation makes more economic sense. We're too complex to be automated. The technology is advancing rapidly, and that's what is different this time versus what I mentioned in previous decades. It's the pace and magnitude of change. But also it's narrow-focused and solves for specific, high-value business problems. And in a fast-paced, globalized economy, businesses succeed and grow by being innovative rather than by focusing on cutting costs. So instead of Terminator, maybe think Iron Man or Iron Woman, where employees and managers are becoming augmented by AI and are able to do things that no human was able to do before. And I just want to dig a little bit deeper in the data before we shift to our next myth and see how this more optimistic but no less challenging story unfolds. There seems to be a broad consensus that the scope of automation will continue to expand in the next 3 years and in fact accelerate from 12% of automated work today to nearly double in 3 years. But there's another interesting finding here that I'd like to draw your attention to. 3 years ago, 57% of the work was done exclusively by humans, where 3 years from now, the reporting organizations indicated only 22% of work will be done exclusively by humans. So automation is taking work away, or to be more specific, is automating many of the repetitive, independent, rules-bound tasks that we humans used to do and still do, leaving us, though, to be more creative, collaborative, and work on the innovative side of things. And that can only be a good thing. And so in a way, what we say is that robots are perhaps de-robotizing the humans, or said differently, technology facilitates more humanity. If we assume it's a force that we can't resist, then we focus on the fear and we miss this amazing opportunity.
Leslie, let me see if I can catch you there. Can you say more about the how did you say it? The human de-robotization highlighted by, and what are some of the main technologies that will help make that happen?
Absolutely. I'll walk through 3 examples. One is on robotic process automation, or RPA. Second, on artificial intelligence, and then a third on social robotics. So let me walk through each of these briefly. So if we start with robotic process automation, which we know is a quick win for many organizations and often the starting point in the journey of automating cognitive tasks, RPA vendors are winning contract after contract from business process outsourcing or BPO providers, and for a good reason. For years, companies outsourced manual, low-value, labor-intensive, rules-bound tasks and made the most of labor arbitrage. without really worrying too much about process efficiency. But now, with RPA, you can use software to do most of these tasks in-house and at a lower cost than perhaps a BPO contract. So second, the next area, things become a little bit more interesting when businesses start strategizing about adding AI in their core processes and making the most of what we refer to as cognitive automation. So think of sophisticated predictive modeling using machine learning algorithms, recommendation engines to accelerate customer journeys, or deep learning and neural nets that understand human language and are powering chatbots and voice-activated digital assistants like you answered on Alexa and Siri, and which I can comment are used also frequently by my kids in our house to ask any question possible. And given the wide range of digital maturity across industries, AI adoption varies significantly. Leaders at these big high-tech companies are far ahead in the game by embedding AI at the core of their business models. But the opportunity is enormous for all industries. I can give a couple examples. Think about healthcare and how AI can automate much of medical diagnosis, profoundly impacting what doctors do. Or what about in call centers, where you often may not even know if you're talking to a robot or a human. And the third, social robotics, is the new generation of robots, plus sensors, plus artificial intelligence, the sum of which results in intelligent machines that can move safely in a human environment and collaborate with humans on a multitude of tasks. So the typical example, the Kiva robots that Amazon is using to re-engineer its fulfillment order process. They bought Kiva for $775 million in 2012, and in 2 short years, the robots cut operating expenses by about 20%, which translated to $22 million per fulfillment center. So this is just the ROI on this is phenomenal and shows how businesses can win when they think strategically around AI adoption.
Leslie, those are some, it's a great overview of the tools, and those are some great examples and specifics. You're going to bust another myth. Are you headed into the impact of that on the organization? We kind of think it's IT and tech, and HR and others need to be involved as well. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, exactly. The next myth that we wanted to bust is exactly that, the idea that automation is the exclusive domain of IT. We hear that a lot, that that's not our concern, IT is going to address that. But more than half of employers say it will take breakthrough approaches in the human resources role to meet these challenges of automation on a multitude of levels. All of our business functions need to be thinking about how this affects them, their people, and the way in which work gets done. This is equally true and important for us in HR. Many organizations have stepped up their people functions over the last decade so that we really have a voice at that board table on key people decisions, process decisions. This is even more critical today and will continue to be as we move in the future of digitalization. But what is noteworthy here is that I would guess that these types of strategic discussions are happening across your organizations, whether we, HR, is part of them or not. So again, it's critical now more than ever before. HR needs to be ready to strategically partner with the business to come up with new, innovative ways in which we can manage people, decisions, and challenges in this fast-changing workplace. We need to continue to evolve our approaches, and in some cases, come up with completely new breakthrough approaches to how we manage people, work, and talent. And I can give just a quick couple of examples on how chatbots are impacting the HR world and becoming increasingly common. Renee and I both have clients that are starting to build out chatbots in their HR center, their HR call center, helping to be sort of an FAQ, company policy resource. Definitely being used for onboarding and or recruiting as we think about the screening process and background checks, just as a place to start.
Leslie, I wonder if you could go just a notch further with that for our audience. Can you say more about how about this a little more pragmatically?
Yes, absolutely. At a program level, our survey participants told us that performance management, leadership development, and organization structure are the top 3 areas where HR will need to have breakthrough approaches. We already have some organizations making significant changes in the performance management space. We've had a lot of dialogue and work with organizations to understand what work can within performance management can be more automated, so that really taking away the administrative burden on leaders and managers, so they can have really deep, comprehensive career development feedback conversations with their teams. And as such, there's recognition that the skills required by leaders in the future will continue to change. In particular, as we manage different generations in the workplace, different organization structures, and how we're really starting to evolve as boundaries of our organizations become more fluid with different types of workers. And we all know from our own personal experiences how critical leaders and managers are to supporting talent and employees through change. In our survey, 66% of employers expect leader and manager activities to change over the next 3 years. The key piece here, though, is skilling our managers and leaders in change leadership to help engage their organization during times of uncertainty, when they themselves, we ourselves as leaders, are uncertain too. And over the last 18 months to 2 years, we've seen organizations start to take actions to prepare as the external marketplace around us evolves. More and more over the last 2 years, we're seeing organizations taking steps to address talent deficits through embarking on more strategic workforce planning compared to that more traditional headcount planning as we saw in the past. Further, 31% of companies have taken some action and are somewhat prepared. Clients I'm working with, and certainly others of you on the line, are certainly starting to take an approach to enabling careers based on more agile and flatter organization structures. And the data supports this, where we see about a quarter starting to take action, another quarter have already taken action, and then another quarter considering taking action. Companies are also starting to consider the implications on this on total rewards and benefits, and what does this mean for what we used to refer to as our employee value proposition, but our overall talent value proposition. And lastly, we're seeing an area of opportunity in this concept of what we refer to as deconstructing jobs and identifying reskilling pathways for talent. And what that really means is, and we'll go into a little bit more detail, but as we look at the work and as we reconstruct and deconstruct these roles, how do we need to reskill the talent that we have in the roles today to prepare them for what we need for tomorrow? That's what we mean by reskilling pathways. And over a third of companies stated that they are unprepared for this, and only 22% said they are prepared. So as the business brings in AI and automation into the workplace, in HR, we really can help take a business process, deconstruct the activities that are carried out by a number of jobs, identify which tasks can be best performed by automation, and how jobs can then be reconstructed.
Leslie, can you say more about this notion of deconstructing jobs?
Yes, absolutely. So I liken deconstructing of jobs to the next generation of job analysis. We've been analyzing jobs and doing activity analysis for decades. We're now taking it to another level. When we look to deconstruct roles, we look to examine it closely at a task and activity level, and then classify activities into 3 broad areas. So one being routine, physical and cognitive activities that are repeatable and predefined versus those that are variable. Second, cognitive, activities that require judgment and credibility versus those that are physical. And then third, collaborative, activities that require communication and social interaction versus those that are independent. And then we continue with a series of questions, such as, does the work go away completely? Now that we've had this opportunity to take a pause and look at the work and the activities within the body of work, is it time to say we've been doing this for years, but maybe this task isn't relevant anymore? Another question is, can any of the activities be automated, as we have described? And then, can it be done differently? Maybe it could be done by a different function. Maybe it's done outsourced by someone on a talent platform or a contractor, or done by someone else with more skill or less skill. We can take these activities and identify the best source of how to get the work done. So let's take, for example, a finance analyst. The collaborative activities, we'll say we want to keep those with the employee. They're still going to do that work. That doesn't change. The preparation of journal entries, for example, we see the most effective way of getting that work done is by someone on a talent platform, and this is likely to be quicker and more cost effective. The routine activities can be carried out by AI and RPA, and then the employee part of the job, we considered against another deconstructed role, and we restructured it so the new role is more interesting and inspiring for an employee to conduct. I just want to pause on that one. I had a recent situation where there was a role that sort of felt like, I'll call it a dead-end job. There really wasn't anywhere to go next. But this role was incredibly valuable to the business and to the organization. But the employees didn't see that there was a next step for them. So they were able to pause and look at this and say, how can we restructure it so it's more valuable from an employee perspective as well? And then I'll round this out, Jim, before we move on to the reconstructed role now is the senior finance analyst, can be reset with new skills such as business acumen, critical thinking, and digital focus. These skills become much more important than they were before we did this exercise of deconstruction and reconstruction. So that's just a little bit of digging into the question that you asked there, Jim.
No, it's fascinating. You know, it's amazing how all of this is having an enormous impact on HR, leadership, manager roles, our approach to strategic workforce planning. You talk about agile and flatter structures and the impact of those. I know we're going to, Renee, you're going to take us into our next myth, and I think you were going to move from how the technology is impacting the jobs and the people.
Oh, thank you. So yes, thanks, Jim. The next myth that we wanted to bust was around workplace automation and the impact on workers and jobs. And what our survey revealed was that automation is expected to result in new combinations of work, talent, and skill requirements, as well as work relationships. So today, I think Leslie alluded to this. Today, 83% of the work is being done by full-time employees, 7% by part-time, and the rest by free agents, consultants, or outside agencies with very little work today, according to the organizations in our survey, very little work for them being performed by workers on loan or free agents. And we're expecting that to really shift in the next 3 years. So organizations are telling us that they expect to reduce the amount of work being performed by full-time employees and increase their use of part-time talent, free agents, workers on loan from other organizations, and free agents on a talent platform. So that's really what we're seeing in this data. And then, Jim, I think we wanted to talk maybe a bit about the skills piece. I'm wondering if we can go to our third polling question and see what the audience thinks about
That's a great
skills.
idea. A question just came in from Jennifer. It's interesting. As we talk about this, what would you guys say about monitoring and tracking agile work teams? You know, everything's moving toward that agile, fluid kind of structure. Have you seen any better practices out there and how organizations are monitoring and tracking some of that work?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. I'm not sure so much about the tracking, but I will say that what we're seeing, we do have some thoughts on best practices for agile work environments. And I think technology is enabling a lot of that, right? If we think about Skype and Blue Jeans and the different ways of working, it allows for a much more virtual and agile environment. One of the things I remember, I was at a conference recently, earlier this year, and a lot of the CHROs in the room were asking questions about, you know, when we have, and this goes beyond Agile, but when we're thinking about virtual collaboration, how do we do that in a way that allows for inclusion and diversity, that allows for every voice to be heard? And one of the things that one of the organizations shared was that they actually, in the technology platform they use, and I don't remember if it was Google Hangouts or if it was something more like Blue Jeans, but they actually use avatars sometimes in meetings instead of their actual name, so that when they're using a chat feature like we are using today in this technology, that people don't know necessarily that it was the CFO that made this comment or that it was this leader that made this comment versus you know, one of the newer employees, so that all ideas are sort of democratized and heard in a similar way. So not quite the question on Agile, but it's really interesting to think about how inclusion and diversity plays into these.
What a great example, using avatars to democratize our communications approach. That's great. Yeah, let's take a look at this next poll and see what people would say about skills as we see them.
Yeah, so would love your guys' thoughts on to what extent your HR function is prepared for the changing skill requirements resulting from automation, that should say, and digitalization.
Yeah, over half the group coming in at currently planning, but a pretty good mix as well. 25% already taking action, and another quarter not yet prepared. Not quite there yet.
Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so what we found, you know, and Leslie walked us through for the financial analyst the idea of job deconstruction, where certain tasks, right, we're not looking at jobs, we're actually breaking it down to the task level, where certain tasks could become automated. And in order to successfully take those tasks that remain, right, and reconstruct them into jobs with the right talent in place, we need to match the skills requirements for work with the skills of talent, and also take into account that talent's motives and attributes, like their willingness to upskill or reskill. You know, some of the literature that I read coming out of things like the World Economic Forum is the idea of ongoing continuous learning as adults now, you know, just considering where we are in the world. So our survey revealed what we are calling a bit of a skills dichotomy. And by that we mean companies are anticipating the need to either upskill talent and pay more for certain skills as a result of reconstructing jobs, and simultaneously expecting to design jobs that require fewer skills. So again, it's that dichotomy of some jobs with more skills that'll cost more, and some jobs with fewer skills. So as jobs change, it's going to have a really interesting implication for things like compensation and base salary. Meaning, how do we as HR community think about the value of jobs and how we get that benchmark data to understand the value of changing skills? So I know in our world of work at Willis Towers Watson, we've actually started to reconfigure our compensation surveys so that you can see side by side what is the cost of a job and what is the cost of the top skills related to that job. For example, if you were to buy that skill set or a fraction of that skill set from talent on a platform. So the Future of Jobs survey, actually from the World Economic Forum, isn't always an interesting one to discuss when we start talking about skills. And that survey highlights the top 10 skills that are projected to be in demand by all employers in 2020. And in a nutshell, it says that yes, technical skills are important, but there's also soft or behavioral skills that are really important when we consider the future of work. And those are things that will really differentiate humans from machines. So things like emotional intelligence, creativity, managing people. So encourage everyone to take a look at that report if you haven't seen it.
Renee, in addition to these changing skill sets, what else are you expecting will change as a result of automation?
Yeah, great question. So where we see from our survey an increase in activities in the next 3 years due to automation is in a couple of areas. So for example, and this I don't think will surprise anyone, clients are saying that they see increasing flexibility in scheduled hours to get work done. So again, now we can be online and connected and doing work. It's not so much work-life balance anymore as so much as work-life integration, at least in terms of many of the professional jobs. We also see clients telling us that enabling work to be deployed to other locations like talent on a platform. Having fewer employees and fewer full-time employees and using more non-employee talent, right? Taking, optimizing that ability to use talent on a platform or contingent workers in other ways. And then, of course, changing the way we design jobs to be done with more skills or fewer skills. And conversely, so those are the things that are increasing, right? Conversely, there's one area that our survey revealed where clients are saying, you know what, we think this is going to decrease. And that's around, this one kind of surprised me, but it was the idea of improving collaboration and information sharing. And so when I saw that in our data, I was like, why would that decrease? And my gut tells me that it's not necessarily because the need to collaborate and share information will go away. We know that's not true. But I think it's more that it's already an emphasis today, right? With tools like Slack or Skype or Hangouts or BlueJeans, it's increasingly part of our rhythms of business.
It's amazing that the collaboration tools, collaboration's already here. It's a great point. And you talk about new skills and changing job design, how collaboration tools are already here. I think we've got time for about one more myth, Renee. Is there one more that you have found to debug?
Yeah, and that was this idea that contingent workers are disengaged and not committed to an organization's
Oh, that's great.
success.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, and what we found was actually that half of survey respondents said that, no, you know what, in fact, our contingent workers that we are tapping into, and we will be doing that again increasingly more in the next 3 years, they're actually just as likely to put in extra effort as our full-time employees. And not only do these employers believe that these workers are just likely to put in that extra effort, they actually say, you know what, they're also just as likely to recommend my organization as a good place to work. So this really underscores the importance of leaders and managers being able to engage and lead not just full-time employees, but that whole ecosystem of workers that lends their time to an organization. And because that talent is so critical and is committed to our organizations and likely to promote the company as a good place to work, nearly half of our survey respondents said that they are considering providing rewards to this population. Now, every time we say this, someone asks the question, oh goodness, but what about this idea of co-employment? So what I want to be careful and what I want everyone to understand is it's not the same thing to say, okay, we're going to give them access to our 401k plan. Maybe not that, but maybe we're giving access to retirement planning tools to that population. Or maybe we're providing them some kind of access to wellness programs like our gym, or we're giving them recognition in other ways. So as different talent enters the picture, like contingent workers and workers on talent platforms, we need to start thinking about the ways that these different talent sets will experience work and how they may be different from those of more traditional
Renee, can you say more about what you mean by different talent sets?
Sure, and I think Leslie alluded to this. So Leslie explained that we're really evolving this notion of the employee proposition to, the employee value proposition to the talent value proposition. And that's a framework that sets up what you offer people who work for you and the behaviors you expect for them. So not just, again, around the full-time employees, but around that whole work ecosystem. And this could include constructing a total rewards approach that takes into account not just permanent talent, but the other talent that the organization relies on to get work done independently. So the future, for example, of benefits is increasingly one of a benefits marketplace based on what is most valued for the talent in your work ecosystem. So this could include health and benefit programs, and solutions for contingent or part-time workforce. For example, benefit solutions provided by Stride Health, as well as benefits for permanent talent. So Stride Health, as an example, provides for freelancers benefits to get health care, benefits for tax planning, etc. And that's one thing that's starting to be offered to that workforce. So the question really is, how will you differentiate your organization from others competing for that same skill set and that same talent, for example, from a talent platform or from contingent workers? And how will you create a connection to your organization and its culture and how work gets done so that you can achieve those business objectives and drive high performance? That's really what we think about in terms of the talent value proposition. So that idea of engaging with all of that talent and determining how you would reward them from a total rewards
Wonderful.
perspective.
Excellent. I want to remind the audience that the chat box is open. Please, if you have questions, bring them on in. And Leslie and Renee, as I summarize, I ask you to just think about one better practice example that you've seen relative to some of this work that you might share a story with us around. But it's so interesting that we started and we thought that this new technology was really driving cost and minimizing errors, when in fact the goal is about augmenting and improving people's productivity and performance. We thought that this was really a tech and IT concern, and you've summarized so nicely that there are enormous breakthroughs in HR that are impacting these results. We talked about the negative impact of automation, while in fact it's bringing in new work, new talent, new skill requirements, new jobs that have been redefined worldwide. And we talked about the contingent worker and the new work arrangements and how they are in fact performing very similarly to the rest of the workforce. Wonderful clarifications for us around some of the myths that I think are out there and guiding us. How about one story from your work that might take us just a little bit further into one of these examples?
Sure. So I'm trying to think. The first thing that sort of comes to mind for me is this going back to the skills piece, because that's kind of one of my favorite topics to think about is how are we going to understand the skills that employees have and the skills that we need related to work, and how do we create that matching algorithm between the two. So one of the, and Jim, I think you said, share some stories around what are we seeing as sort of best practice. One of the, this is one of the topics that some of my clients are in the tech space in particular are very interested in. And it's the idea of we need to, and I remember my clients explained it this way, and I thought it was a great analogy. And she said that if we went to the CFO and we said, we need to understand our real estate footprint. Tell me how many buildings we have, what's the square footage, what it looks like, etc. The CFO should be able to go to the head of real estate and come back with that answer fairly quickly. If you took that same question to the head of HR and said, tell me about our talent. What skills do they have? What are they working on? And what do they want to learn? And by the way, what do they know from their past life that they may not, or what have they experienced in their past that they may not be applying to their current remit in terms of whatever job they have? And that's when we couldn't answer that question. So we don't, my clients in general don't have good data on people on the supply side. They know better what they need in terms of jobs, right? Talent acquisition is pretty sophisticated in terms of determining the skill sets required. We don't always know what people can do and what they want to do and what they can learn. And so that capturing that data on the supply side and understanding talent the same way that LinkedIn does, or the same way perhaps that Amazon understands me as a consumer, is really where I'm seeing clients starting to say, this is a tipping point and we need to get this right.
That's fascinating. That's great. That's a great example. Leslie, before we go to you for a story, one question came in from Sandy. You know, when we're talking about contingent workers, good question. How do you work around potential co-employment issues? Any sense of how to address that?
Leslie, do you want to?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So we get this question. It's a great one. And I would echo what Renee was mentioning earlier and add a little bit to that. We certainly want to include legal in these conversations earlier. So as you're starting to think about your broader talent ecosystem and the different types of workers you are going to include in that, including legal in those conversations earlier, that you can address it earlier on. I would say, I think, in all fairness and in full disclosure, it's a little bit of too soon to tell of what some of the outcomes of those of that relationship will look like. But again, our guidance is be sure to include legal earlier on in the process so that you're not moving beyond what your organization is comfortable doing as it relates to that definition and interpretation of that. That's been my experience thus far. I don't know, Renee, if there's anything you would add to that.
No, Leslie, you said it well. It's exactly right. I think it was Sandy that asked the question, is that the laws are evolving and changing. We certainly don't purport to be legal experts, so we always advise our clients to work with their legal counsel and determine, in regard to that organization's risk tolerance.
Yep, that's a good point. Betsy raises another question. What tools might you recommend for assessing current state skills of each employee?
It's a great question, and I'm sure Leslie has thoughts too. So it depends. The answer is it depends, right? The typical answer, if you're talking about technical skills or if you're talking about some of the more behavioral skills. So in terms of some of the more behavioral skills, obviously we've got great abilities to use psychometric assessments to understand things like, we use this to understand things like growth mindset, or in terms of the ability to thrive in a culture, for example. Someone asked earlier about Agile. So that's So I think we use traditional psychometric assessments kind of for that, to understand some of the softer skills. In terms of some of the more technical skills, there are a lot of providers that are coming into this space, and a lot of them are disrupting the traditional notion of skills. So we partner, Willis Towers Watson, with an incubator here in Silicon Valley by the name of Plug and Play. And so I'm seeing startup companies that are trying to solve that skills question in different ways, and sometimes with different use cases. I will say there's a lot of noise, and I don't know that anyone's figured out the exact solution for assessing technical skills yet. There's lots of options and lots of opportunity. So I think you kind of have to figure out what also is available for your company. Another thing that comes to mind is that sometimes HR core systems, for example, Workday, have that ability and functionality too. So I do have clients that are using Workday to assess technical skills.
Great.
Yeah, and I would just add, Jim,
Sure.
real briefly on that point, exactly as you said, Renee, some additional examples of what we see a lot of organizations first trying to figure out is, and certainly you're ahead on this given your question, but what are those skills? So as we look across the organization, and we can say within particular job family groups and in job families, what are those skills that are required? What are those competencies, et cetera? What do we see that may be common across? What do we see that may be unique? So we first have this inventory of what we need versus what we have, to your point about the assessments. And within the assessments, definitely everything Renee said I would definitely agree with. And then we have some organizations saying it's a balance of how we assess it with a psychometric tool, et cetera, versus what we allow for the employees to self-report, and how do we level set that information with what we're getting from the assessments to then match in the right way. So starting to bring those two pieces together.
Yep, great point. Maybe time for one more question. Sharon has an interesting question here around reskilling. But how might you address reskilling and upskilling when your workforce really doesn't have the skills or abilities needed as you automate and deconstruct the work?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great question. It's a big question, right? So I think it's, as Leslie was saying, it's really deconstructing and understanding what those skill requirements are, and then figuring out how to gain those skills, or how to retool people. So I have one client who has thought about it in 3 ways, and they said, as we automate work, there's going to be 3 scenarios. The first scenario is that we need to upskill people, right? So there may be a set of workers that is going to be augmenting performance with technology, and they need to learn how to use that technology. That's one scenario. A second scenario is they need to be completely reskilled, and what we need to understand in that scenario is what is that ability of that collective of individuals to reskill. And then the last situation would be to offboard talent. And this client cares so much about their employees. They're a huge part of the community, that they're actually working with other organizations in their space to say, hey, these are the skills and the talent that we may be offboarding. Let's work together to do to figure out where you may need those skill sets in your company, so that we can do a talent transfer. So really trying to think beyond the organization and think about the general community, working also with educators and governments, et cetera, to kind of make sure we're taking care of talent and finding where they fit.
Well put.
Yeah, and I would, just to round that out, I would add that certainly this doesn't work for every organization, but I have heard and partnered with some organizations that say this is the time for us to really look at, and certainly we can't eliminate all our workforce. That's not the point, but this is the time to really say we are going to upskill, and this may require some changes to the current employee base as we make some of those decisions and prioritize what that looks like for us.
Well, I really want to thank you, Renee Smith, and Leslie Jennings, and the whole team at Willis Towers Watson, on behalf of all of us here at the Conference Board, for a great session and a great overview on the future of work today. Some upcoming conferences here at the conference board for a pretty significant $500 discount to upcoming conferences. There's a code there for your consideration. But in October, we've got the Employee Engagement and Experience Summit in Las Vegas. Very related to some of the topics we've talked about around new leader and manager roles, driving engagement and employee experience. The 2018 Performance Management Conference in November here in New York, and then the 19th Annual Talent Management Conference, a flagship, if you will, in March, again here in New York. Please join us if you can, especially with a great discount there. If you're looking for more information, some very good related publications listed here. Driving Digital Transformation, HR's Role, the C-Suite Challenge for 2018, Reinventing the Organization for the Digital Age, a couple of fabulous reports. A webcast coming up on October 2nd around the future of work, the intersection of man and machine, a webcast on October 2nd. And lastly, the 14th Annual Org Design Conference in November, again here in New York. On behalf of the conference board and our friends at Willis Towers Watson, I want to thank all of you again for joining us. Thank you very much for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you again at another conference board event. I'm Jim O'Hearn, and until then, have a good day.